While most political coverage is fixated on the latest developments in Congress, some of the biggest, most pressing issues facing Americans are decided in the more anonymous halls of our state capitol buildings.
State houses do a huge amount of work while no one is watching, from abortion to gun control to environmental legislation. And yet, admit it, you probably don't know who your state legislator is.
This week we push aside our regular reporters to bring you 4 state lawmakers, 2 from Missouri, 2 from Kansas, to dissect the thorniest, most pressing issues, from guns to schools, marijuana to Uber, bringing back firing squads as a new way of executing our prisoners, to clamping down on what food stamp recipients can now put in their grocery carts. Plus, KCPT special correspondent Michael Price examines why so many metro area residents are still without health insurance 5 years after passage of the Affordable Care Act. But is expanding Medicaid in Kansas or Missouri on the cards as a solution? We press our lawmakers for answers in this special hour-long edition of Week in Review. Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes and we're delighted to have you with us again on the program that goes beyond the soundbite and takes you behind the headlines making news in Kansas City. This week, it's our decision maker edition of the program. From the Kansas Senate, Jeff Melcher is with us. He is a Leeward Republican and CEO of the information technology company NetStandard. And from the Kansas House, Kansas City, Kansas Democrat Kathy Wolf Moore, Chief of Staff to former Wyandotte County Mayor Carol Marinovich. She's now Business Director at the KU Hospital. From the Missouri House, Rick Bratton is with us. The Harrisonville Republican is a former Marine, now serving his 5th year in the Missouri legislature. He leads the family construction company and tends a 40-acre farm just north of Harrisonville. And Brandon Ellington is a Democrat House member from Kansas City, Missouri. He is the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. First of all, do you ever actually see each other? Do you ever connect between one side of the state line as Missouri versus Kansas lawmakers? Do you ever get together at all?
No, we don't. But I would love for that to change.
So this is obviously a nice, wonderful opportunity to have a group hug on this program at this point in time then. Senator Melcher, a quiz question for you, if we can do that. The biggest issue facing Kansas lawmakers this legislative session is blank.
Well, I would say it's going to be to close the budget hole, but more importantly, to get the agricultural community involved in the funding of government. That's going to be a great challenge.
So when we talk about the budget hole in Kansas, is that as a result of tax cuts in Kansas not actually working in the state?
No, the tax cuts are actually working very well. We've got the largest number of private sector employees or people employed in the history of the state of Kansas. We've got wages rising faster than the national average. The tax cuts are doing exactly what they were expected to do.
So why is there such a big budget hole in the state?
Well, when you lower one particular revenue source, you're going to have a reduction in that revenue source until the economy can respond to that. But nobody ever expected that we were going to just snap our fingers and all of a sudden people were going to appear. New companies would just appear in Kansas. So it's doing exactly what we had predicted it would do.
Okay, we're going to talk a lot more about that during this program. But what did you put as the #1 issue facing Kansas lawmakers, Kathy Wolf Moore?
Well, actually, I would agree with Senator Melcher on part of that. I believe that the $600 million deficit we're facing next year is the biggest, by far, problem we're going to face. However, I probably don't agree that the tax cuts are working. In fact, I think that 2012-2013 tax cuts are directly responsible for the $600 million hole. I think it's a bit of a self-imposed recession. And I think the first rule, they always say when you're digging the hole is to stop digging, but in this case, the first rule might be realize that you're actually in the hole, admit the problem, and do something about it. So I think that's by far our biggest issue.
Moving on to the Missouri side, Representative Rick Bratton, fill in this blank. The biggest issue facing Missouri lawmakers this legislative session is?
Transportation, by far. Our roads are in a dire state, and it's the funding and the ability to fund those roads and make sure that our citizens are able to enjoy those roads that they pay for.
And there was a sales tax on the ballot last year in the state of Missouri to try and bring in a lot more money for highways. That failed big time in the state of Missouri. So one of the fixes has been suggested, including by the governor, is to have toll roads on I-70 from Kansas City to St. Louis. Is that going to happen this session?
I don't see the toll roads. You know, one push is for an increase in the gas tax. I've proposed something that we need to actually prioritize our spending. You know, we're spending $700 million a year almost in tax credits, but yeah, we're not funding our duty as a government. And I just think we need to get back to prioritizing our spending. Because we have it, it's just being allocated in different areas.
You mentioned a gas tax. Would you support an increase in the gas tax?
No. I ran on a platform of no tax increases, and we bring in plenty of taxpayer dollars, and I think we just need to reallocate and really make tough decisions to fund our necessary duties.
But how about then having tolls on I-70? Would you support that?
No, I don't think the toll roads are the way to go. I really don't.
So what is the solution?
Well, I think, like I said, prioritizing the spending and stop with the expenditures of, like I said, tax credit programs, and let's ensure that we're funding our roads properly with the money we are bringing in, rather than hitting the taxpayer up for toll roads or for a tax increase at the pump.
Okay, Brandon Ellington, the biggest issue for you facing the Missouri legislature this session is what?
The biggest issue is criminal justice reform, hands down to judicial reform. But the biggest issue that I've seen we've been doing is finding new ways to increase burdens on the citizens of Missouri. But the two biggest issues should be criminal justice reform and judicial reform.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Which one? Criminal justice reform? When we're talking about criminal justice reform, we need to look at and evaluate police practices, changing certain laws at the state level, resources that goes to police departments such as video and audio equipment. Judicial reforms, we have to definitely pass and look at some of the way municipalities have been allowed to gouge citizens repeatedly and to fund those local municipalities from tickets, excessive fines, excessive ordinance violations.
Okay, well, this was supposed to be the year in the Missouri legislature that was supposed to be fixing Ferguson. And there were going to be 60 bills in the Missouri legislature introduced to improve police community relations and law enforcement accountability, from mandating that all police officers in the Show Me State wear body cameras, to a bill that requires the appointment of a special prosecutor in all cases of police shootings involving an unarmed subject. After all that talk, has anything actually happened, Representative Ellington?
No.
Nothing?
No. Only thing that's moving is the municipal reform bill that was filed by Senator Smith and his corresponding bill in the House. But as far as the video and audio equipment, the bill has not moved. The police evaluation bill has not moved. The mental evaluation bill has not moved. Any bill that's dealing with any type of police department reform has been stalled in the Missouri House.
Why?
I believe it's Republican leadership, not necessarily the Republican body, because I talk to people on both sides of the aisle. So when you talk about video and audio, it's actually consensus about the technology and the usefulness of the technology. But the chair of the committee doesn't want to move the bill out of the committee. The speaker has referred all of the bills, and he referred those back in January. And we're now in April, and we have very little hearings on most of those bills.
Well, you are part of the Republican majority, Rick Bratton. Why hasn't anything moved in the area of that? There were 60 bills, from body cameras to eliminating grand juries in the state of Missouri to hiring special prosecutors in all cases in which there was an officer-involved shooting. Why hasn't anything happened there? Well,
you know, I can't speak to what the leadership, you know, and what they're reasoning. I can't speak for the chairman. Do I think there's some areas that we do need to address? I do think the body cameras are a great solution. Now, how are we going to pay for that? You know, that's one thing. You know, the representative has offered, but it would require, as written, the largest tax increase in Missouri state history to do so.
Which was a 1% tax on all firearms sales, handgun sales, and ammunition sales in the state of Missouri. That was your bill.
Yes, that's one of the bills. See, that's the problem with the debate and the honesty around the conversation. I have one bill to raise a 1% sales tax, one bill for an increase on 1% for handguns and ammunition, but I have several amendments to address the funding. So if we seriously want to see, I even have a bill that requires requires local municipalities to take 10% of their traffic fines to pay for the video and audio. So if we're talking about truly getting down to the bread and meat of the conversation and addressing the funding issue, we can do that. That's why we're legislators. You can create an amendment to any bill and structurally change that bill if we're serious about that piece of legislation.
Okay. What about on the Kansas side? Was there fallout from Ferguson? Did it come over to the state line and to Kansas?
Well, there was a bill in the Senate, I believe, and it hasn't made its way through the legislature yet, but it would have required the body cameras. A couple of issues with that I would agree with some of the participants here is the cost is enormous. The other thing is that I think we have to examine the policy of how they're used. That's a privacy issue. Oftentimes police officers are coming into the home. So how are those used? How long is that tape kept? So I think there's a lot of policy work that needs to catch up before we can actually impose this policy on local governments.
Senator, wasn't there a body camera bill that came before the Senate?
Well, not before the full House. I believe Senator Haley may have offered an amendment, but it's difficult when you're debating on the floor to bring in an entirely new topic. As has been said here, it's a complex issue. It needs a lot of debate. It's one of those things that appears on the surface to be a real good idea until you start to understand the cost, how you deal with the incredible amounts of data that have to be preserved, what the public then does with that information after they have it, and the privacy issues that Representative Wolf-Moore talked about. So it's a complex issue. I don't participate on the committees that deal with that, but obviously it didn't make it from committee in the Senate, so I really don't know where it's headed.
But the bottom line in the state of Missouri is nothing has happened, Representative Ellington, and you don't see that changing before the end of the legislative session.
No, I don't. Nothing has happened. And this, if I could, real quick, when we talk about privacy issues, we have other states that have instituted this type of technology. So either these states are smarter than we are to address privacy issues and certain issues, and in the public, you have no respectable, reasonable expectation of privacy. So when we're talking about going inside the house, those are policies that we can craft, and we can allow local police departments to craft those policies.
Representative Bratton.
Well, I agree with that, but when we're seeing media frenzy occur when something like this happens, and when things are sunshineable, and the media outlets will immediately be able to sunshine request the footage, that impedes the investigation, and it polarizes everything. So we've got to have good sound solutions before we do a knee-jerk reaction that may have extreme adverse effects to what we're doing. So I think we've got to be very wise in our approach to this. But I do think that we do need to do something like this.
But nothing has happened. We're talking about media coverage and where it gets lots of attention. Kansas Governor Sam Brownback just signs into law a measure permitting Kansans to carry concealed weapons without a permit or training.
It is the right that Kansans hold dear and have repeatedly and overwhelmingly reaffirmed a commitment to protecting.
Required to carry a concealed weapon in Kansas starting July 1. That training is currently 8 hours with a gun. Why does the legislature no longer feel that's necessary, Senator Melcher?
Well, Nick, when I first heard about this bill, I had some concerns because on the onset of this, it seems like a pretty ominous thing, but Kansas has been an open carry state since the 1800s, so you can carry a firearm right now on the streets as long as it's not concealed. So allowing them to be able to put a jacket on over their gun it really isn't as extreme as it might sound on the surface. And there's 6 other states that do some form of this currently. Crime's not out of control there. I don't see it as a problem. It's probably going to be one of those things where there's a lot of talk about it. After it's done, we're not going to really see anything change.
We won't know, though, until July the 1st, though. Kathy Wolf-Moore.
I absolutely did not support this bill, and I see a lot of problems with it. A couple years ago, the state legislature, certain legislators spent a lot of time explaining concealed carry class, how valuable it was. And one of the things that was highlighted was that they spend a lot of time talking about the use of deadly force and the law surrounding that. So, and when I talk to many people that provide this concealed carry class and participants, they told me that that changed their attitudes towards guns. And every time I ask someone, why do we need to do this, I hear the same answer all the time. Well, it's our right. I always learn with rights come responsibilities. And so I think this is a very bad idea. I think the 8-hour class is very good. They teach you how to store a gun, how to handle a gun. You have to be a certain proficiency. And in addition, you have to have a background check. So I think we're dismantling something that is a protection not only for the gun owners, but everyone else.
There's also a huge amount of money that comes in, Senator Melcher, from these gun permits. It's $132.50 to get a gun permit. In 2013, there were 25,000 applications for concealed carry permits in Kansas. If there is a budget problem in Kansas, isn't that a lot of revenue you're losing?
Well, it seems like a lot of money, but in the scope of things, it's relatively small. But, you know, what Representative Wolfmore said, on the surface, it appears to be something that there may be a problem with. But I'm a person that deals with data. And when you see that other states have done this and haven't seen problems with it, I don't expect Kansas is going to be any different. Now, we should be doing safety classes. You know, people don't take carrying a gun lightly. And I think most of the people that the law-abiding citizens that are going to do it will probably still participate in safety training classes, which I think they should.
Now, a Missouri lawmaker is pushing a similar law. Eric Burleson, a Springfield Republican, has introduced a bill that imitates the Kansas law by getting rid of required permits and training. Would you support that, Representative Bratton?
Absolutely. I believe it's your right, it's your constitutional right to bear arms. We have an open carry as well. We also have the Castle Doctrine in Missouri, where you're allowed to carry and conceal within your vehicle and in your home. So right now within your vehicle, you can carry and conceal. If you look at the data of the states that have this, they haven't had an upshoot in crime. They've actually had the opposite. It's been where the crime rate has went down from enacting legislation like this. You have to have a background check in order to purchase a firearm. So you do receive that background check. And yeah, it's your responsibility to be a responsible gun owner. But you also, we live on the state line. In order to go from state to state, you do have to have a carry and conceal permit. So to say that you won't do that, well, if you're traveling, state to state, you will still have to do the carry and conceal course and class and have a permit.
Representative Ellington.
Yeah, I'm very liberal when it comes to gun laws. More than likely, I'll probably end up voting no on the bill, but I'm not scared of the ideal. When you talk about the thin layer of 8 hours of training, I don't really think that gives people adequate training more than somebody that hasn't went through 8 hours of gun training. So I'm not scared of the idea, but more than likely I'll vote against it. But I'm extremely liberal when it comes to gun laws.
Okay. Well, speaking of guns, Missouri lawmakers are considering using a firing squad as an alternative method to lethal injection and drug shortages and botched executions. The bill's sponsor, Republican House member Rick Bratton, Utah recently brought back the firing squad, so this is not a philosophical exercise. Will Missouri join them?
Well, that's why I propose it. I'm going to fight to try to reenact it due to the lack of ability to obtain the drugs utilized for lethal injection. I believe that we have a duty to carry out that sentence, and if it's being held up in court on constitutionality basis, we have to do the means necessary to carry out that punishment. I have researched the types of executions that are utilized and legal within the U.S. and have found that yes, the firing squad, no matter it may sound, just the sound of it, it is more humane than other types.
Now, some states that have looked at the issue of the drug problems of being able to have access to the drugs have just decided to have a moratorium on the death penalty. You never considered that?
No, I believe, especially if you read the cases of these heinous murderers that they did, I believe that there are cases that, yes, you should receive a death sentence. These victims suffered horrendous deaths, and I think it is our duty to carry out a sentence.
Representative Ellington, would you be supporting that bill?
No, I can't support the bill. I think we're actually going backwards when we're talking about using the firing squad. That's tantamount to saying we're going to start hanging people again in front of the public crowds at 12 o'clock at noon. When we talk about the drugs that are used to euthanize people or kill people in the penitentiary, this goes into the type of resources that we're doing in our priorities. Now okay, because when we look at how much money we generate using our penitentiary systems, we have enough money to go in partnerships with companies that actually have humane ways of executing people, but we choose not to do that. We choose to utilize the resources that we get in the penitentiary to keep the penitentiaries exactly how they are, as opposed to improving our correctional institutions.
Why is it that we only sort of hear about this on the Missouri side, yet Kansas has had the death penalty since the mid-1990s? Is that because you haven't executed anybody in the sort of 20 years since there's been the reinstatement of the death penalty in Kansas?
Well, probably so. It's just not a topic that we spend any time discussing. So, you know, when something's a hot topic, everybody's talking about it, that's when the legislature deals with it. We just haven't had anything that's bubbled up to that type of attention.
Well, both states, though, are clamping down on welfare recipients this week. Missouri putting curbs on what you can buy with food stamps. Representative Bratton, you've introduced a bill that blocks food stamp recipients from buying steak and seafood, cookies, chips, and soft drinks with their money. Meanwhile, Kansas Governor Sam Brownback is expected to sign a measure blocking Kansans receiving government assistance from using those funds to visit swimming pools, see movies, get tattoos, body piercings, visit the nail salon, a psychic, or go on a cruise. Plus, the measure limits welfare recipients from withdrawing more than $25 a day from ATMs. Is there really, though, any evidence of welfare recipients in Kansas, first of all, Senator Melcher, actually using their money to get tattoos and to visit psychics?
Well, there is, but that's not the important part of the bill. I think there's been far too much time spent talking about those pieces, but you really need to talk about the important things. First of all, this is nothing new for Kansas. This was put in place when the Brownback administration came in. And since then, we've seen over 6,000 people go from welfare to work because of this program. So to be able to participate, you've got to either be working a minimum 20 hours a week or you have to be in a job training program. The focus should be on those things. I mean, there's nothing that you can do better for a welfare recipient than to get them on the pathway to full employment. And that's what this bill does, and it's been effective. Does it do that?
Well, for a family of four, the maximum amount they can get when they're on TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, is $497 a month. So I can't imagine that we have to tell people that they take a cruise or go to a theme park, because the reality is $497 for a family of four just doesn't go very far. I think the great thing about TANF in general, when we did welfare reform at the national level in 1996, is that we place the emphasis on where we need to place it, and that is cash assistance. People lose their jobs every day. Cash assistance, number one. The second part of that was employment training. That's the most important thing, employment training. And the third thing, probably the biggest barrier to people getting a job, is daycare assistance, child care subsidies. And so I think it's actually a good thing when people avail themselves of TANF, because I think by having this job training, having this assistance, and having this temporary cash assistance, they're more likely to stay off the rolls. So I think much is made of things that just really haven't existed in Kansas.
But with the budget, as we talked about at the very beginning of the program, having a $600,000 deficit that needs to be filled this year in the Kansas legislature, how much money is being saved by these changes?
Well, the money that's being saved is when you get people off of that and working. So they go from drawing money from the system to contributing money to the system. So, we want everybody involved. We want everybody in Kansas to be employed. That's why our unemployment rate is so low right now, because we've put policies in place that direct people into work. And our wage growth higher than the national average. There's a lot of good news in Kansas economically, and it's because of things like this that we're seeing those good results.
I think probably one of the parts of the new legislation that bothers me most was the $25 limit at the ATM. And as a practical matter, if you can only get $25, which I think they don't even do $5 increments, you have a bill to pay and you need $100 cash. You have to make 5 visits to the ATM. Every time you go, you have to expend a couple dollars for that visit. So for your fee to use the ATM. So for a person who's only getting $500 a month, 10% of that is a lot of money. So I think that was very
Does that concern you, Senator Melcher?
Well, it's just not the important part of the bill. It's obviously cumbersome. I think we probably could have upped that limit, but that was the will of the body, and I think it's worth supporting because all of the good things that you get from it beyond that. But I think there's just far too much focus on the trivial pieces of the bill and not focusing on the substantive parts that really improve people's lives.
Okay, well, let's talk about this on the Missouri side, because you were also looking at clamping down on the rules relating to on those who are receiving food stamps on the SNAP program. That included steak and seafood that were on the menu of people receiving food stamps. What is the evidence that that is actually happening, first of all, in the state of Missouri?
Well, first, I've seen it firsthand going through the checkout line. You know, I've seen people actually purchasing crab legs and steak, and then it's with an EBT card. And not to mention, since filing this, I've had an outcry of cashiers from supermarkets send me their story of things that they see, the abuses that they see, and it's rampant. And this isn't an attack on those who are in need of assistance, but I think we need to be good stewards of the taxpayer money, and we need to help those people and help them with good nutritional items, but everything under the sun that's available to be purchased now, the soda, the junk food, and all that kind of stuff, you know, it not only adds into the poor health, but it's extremely expensive, and at the end of the month, they don't have the money to buy the nutritional stuff to get their family by.
Should people be allowed to purchase those items then, Representative Ellington?
No, I think they should. I think this, ideology-wise, I have huge issues with this type of legislation because I see it as retaliation towards poor folks. When you talk about how much money people receive when they're on social services, it's not like they receive the same type of resources as somebody that's working a regular job. So you don't have a overreach of people going to the store, buying lobster, buying steak. And let's say a family that is on social services does decide one day to go get some crab legs or go get a steak. Because they're poor, they shouldn't be allowed to eat lobster and steak. And again, you cannot use food stamps and get lobster and steak for 30 days and have resources to buy juice, milk, and everything else that you need.
But Representative Bratton said he has seen it firsthand and has had cashiers tell him this.
We're talking about a small percentage of people that are victimized and abuse the system. Most people that get on social services are either people that worked and they fell on hard times, or people that have different circumstances that come up in life. What we should be doing is utilizing our social resources as a stair step where people can work themselves out of poverty, as opposed to putting an extra burden on them because we say they're poor, we say they're lazy, or we're saying that they just want to victimize the system. And one of the last things I want to say before we go on, it is an intricate and important part of the bill when we're talking about the reduction of resources that people are allowed to get. When we're talking about $25, we cannot say that that's not an important part of a bill. That's a fundamental aspect of the reasoning behind these type of legislations that we're seeing not only here in Missouri and Kansas, but in various states that are going after poor folks, as opposed to actually creating the type of caveats that would allow people that are in poverty to get education, to work themselves out. We're not doing that.
Representative Bratton.
Well, with the types of foods, he alluded to the fact that people are spending this money on these types of items, and then at the end of the month, they don't have the money to feed their family. And that's exactly what we need to get away from, is making sure that they're getting good nutritional items, and they have that money to go throughout the duration of the time period of the month. This doesn't reduce that amount of money that they receive. It just ensures that what they're purchasing with the taxpayer money is good nutritional items. With the TANF, you know, I totally agree. In the state, we also have a bill that requires face-to-face time with a caseworker that helps them, you know, go through the intricate avenues that are available within the program. And I think that's essential, because if you don't know what's available and what's at your disposal while on this program, you're missing out.
In Kansas City, Missouri, they're trying to increase the minimum wage up to $15, and they're prevented from doing so because of a state law that prevents local cities from changing the minimum wage. I've heard in terms of this argument that if the state was interested, if state lawmakers were interested in helping those who are less fortunate in life, they should be willing to allow an increase in the minimum wage, even among cities. Would you allow for a change in the state law that would permit cities to increase the minimum wage, Representative Bratton?
No, I don't think that's the way we need to go. We've seen other states, I believe it was it Oregon or Washington, that had done this same thing, and they're not seeing a good response of it. They're actually seeing a negative growth. It will increase costs to the end consumer, so it really won't matter much, because you're going to have to, as a business owner, which I am, if I've got to pay this much more for at the end of the month for my labor, I still have to make ends meet. I still have to make things happen as well on my end. So it's going to increase the cost. So it's a wash.
This is one of Kansas City, Missouri Mayor Cy James's big priorities, is to try and change that law at the state level. You don't see that happening either then, Representative Ellington?
No, I think it's a wasted effort. I actually agree with the representative. If we go city by city, it creates too many issues. St. Louis has 93, 94 different municipalities. Kansas City, we have 5 or 6 different municipalities. A better use of his resources and that would help us out is actually to change the state law. For the last 3 years, I filed a bill to raise the minimum wage in the state of Missouri. I think we have it across the board that cuts down on the type of issues that the representative was talking about, of me just moving a couple of blocks to a different municipality to secure my business, and it gives us uniformity underneath the law. I think that's where our mayor should be focusing his attention, is to help the legislators that are actually trying to change the state minimum wage to get the state minimum wage changed.
In the Kansas side here, one of the issues that's been raised is, education allows people to rise out of poverty. You mentioned education yourself, Senator Melcher. That's been a big issue in the state of Kansas. But, let's weigh this up real briefly here. We've just changed the system, the school finance formula, to allow block grants to go to schools, changing what has been a decades-long method by which schools are funded. Are schools helped, hurt, or stay the same as a result of that, Senator Melcher?
Well, they continue to get more money. I mean, we are at a record high funding. Once again, this is for the 4th consecutive year of increasing funding for K-12 education. You don't tend to hear that because people cherry pick particular numbers. When you look at all the dollars that are spent, we're spending more. We went from $5.98 billion last year to $6.15 billion this year. It's $169 million of new money. And people talk about KPERS being a piece of that. That's only $3 million of that $169.
KPERS being the retirement program.
Yes. And it's also on a per student issue, or per student dollar amount as well, because we went from $12,960 last year to $13,343 this year. So we're putting a lot of funding into schools. The block grants are going to ensure that that funding continues, and it's going to give us time as a legislature to work out the details of a new funding formula. The current funding formula just doesn't work. There are abuses in it. We have provisions for poverty that look at free lunch as the multiplier, or the qualifier for additional funding. So if a student receives free lunch, there's a 50% bonus amount of money that goes to those schools as a result of that student receiving that free lunch. And we're at 52% of our students in the state are receiving a free lunch, but our poverty rate is only 18 to 19%. So there are large abuses, and this is done to work the formula to increase the funding that comes to the schools unnecessarily.
Okay, is it helping, hurting, or staying the same then, Representative Moore?
Well, I think for the next 2 years, it's hard to tell, because we don't know after that, we don't know what plan is going to put in place. The block grants came about very quickly. We heard about them on a Thursday in our committee. The school districts received their runs of how they'd be affected on Friday. They had to testify on Monday, and probably one of the biggest things we've done in 10 years is put a new school finance formula, and we did it in about a week's time. I think that people always use the excuse that the formula is complicated. I actually don't think it's not, but it needs to be a formula, because here's what happens. We have all kinds of kids throughout the state. We have kids living in high poverty. We have schools that have bilingual children that deal with as many 50 different languages or dialects. It's going to cost more to educate those kids than it does in a community where there's high wealth. It just does. And so I think what the formula did was take all that into account. So I don't know what formula we're going to come up with after this. Supposedly these block grants are in effect for 2 years, but I am worried about it.
Senator.
Well, there's always this single focus on funding in education. And it's one of the biggest problems we have. We focus solely on the dollars and we ignore all the meaningful parts. And that's a disservice to the students. Now that we've got stable funding, certainly for these next 2 years, we can predict what it's going to be. It's time to focus on how we start to achieve better results from the students. Because if you look over the last decade, we haven't improved test scores in Kansas at all. ACT, SAT, national test scores, they've remained flat even though we've increased funding far faster than the rate of inflation. So the focus needs to be on how we re-engineer education to produce better outcomes for students. We heard testimony in education in the Senate from a Stanford researcher that if we were able to replace the bottom 5% of lowest performers in education, we would go from the teens in the world up to compete for #1 again. We need to be looking at things like this, and that's why I authored a bill to deal with that. This bill allowed the union negotiations to negotiate salary and wage minimums.
But there was a concern that there was alarm that this was going to make it easier to fire teachers, though, wasn't it?
Well, it will, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The private sector has the ability to fire people all the time, but nobody indiscriminately fires their employees. It's not in anyone's best interest. But if you have non-performing educators, it's a disservice to the student. And if you have 2 years of a non-performing educator, your prospect as a student and success in life has dropped dramatically. We can't allow these systems to let a teacher that's not proficient to be in the system for 3 years before we can ever discharge them, because there are a lot of kids
which is an issue that's
that.
also come up in the state of Missouri, and has also been on the ballot in the state of Missouri, which was about teacher tenure and trying to make it easier to get rid of teachers. But Representative Moore.
Well, just to respond to Senator Melcher, I think if we're going to talk about teachers, let's talk about them. In Kansas, we pay at the 40s. We're the 42nd worst in the state in what we pay our teachers. We've done nothing but demean teachers over the last several years. And what they're already seeing in higher education is they're predicting we're going to have a teacher shortage because people are paying attention to what's going on in the Kansas legislature. And I'm afraid that the future for educating and bringing teachers into our classrooms is going to be in great jeopardy.
Okay. Hundreds of supporters gathered in the Kansas State House this week to advocate for Medicaid expansion as hearings on the measure were held. Expanding Medicaid, they say, is essential to providing coverage to an additional 150,000 Kansans currently without insurance. Independent estimates conclude the state has lost over $457 million in federal funds by refusing to expand Medicaid. The same argument is being used in Missouri. KCPT special correspondent Michael Price has been taking a closer look at those falling through the cracks, making too much to qualify for Medicaid, yet too poor to afford coverage on the new federal exchanges.
These are worrying times for Rediscover, a non-profit community mental health center serving the south of Jackson County in Missouri.
We're very concerned because of the loss for last year and the number of people that we're serving as to how to make it through this year. And there isn't an easy way to do that.
I'm just calling to confirm Naomi's appointment for tomorrow.
Rediscover provides services to people affected by mental illness or substance abuse. Traditionally, it's helped those who have limited income, no insurance, or who are underinsured.
I'm just calling to confirm your 2:30 appointment tomorrow with David.
Its funding comes mainly from the public purse, but last year it spent nearly $650,000 of its own money to provide services to the community. After donations and drawing on its cash reserves, it was still nearly $280,000 in the red.
No business, no company of any kind can sustain that loss for very long. We need to refuse services to people, or we need our revenue to go up somehow in terms of having more people that we serve have some kind of insurance or more have Medicaid of some kind.
Over the last few years, Rediscover's expanded its operations to try and meet demand. But as the numbers of those it's helping has risen, the funding's not kept up with inflation. Since 2010, state money to cover the growing costs of centres like Rediscover has risen just once, a 3% increase last year.
Is he voicing a plan to hurt himself? So he's just having the thoughts. Is he having any issues at school or?
4 years ago, Rediscover took just over 8,000 calls from people needing its help.
How long have you used heroin for?
Last year, the numbers had risen to over 13,000, and this year's proving busy as well.
Typically, I see anywhere from 60 to 90 calls a day.
As the strain on its finances has grown, since last December, Rediscover has had to ask the very poorest of its clients to contribute to the costs of their care.
Have you ever been in services anywhere?
No, I haven't.
No? This is your first time?
Yes.
This woman suffered from anxiety and depression for 2 years now, and it's getting worse. She says she lost her job the previous week because of it.
My anxiety is through the roof, and I cannot focus.
She doesn't want her face shown, and we'll call her Mary. She has 2 young children and receives in child support and benefits nearly $1,000 a month.
Yeah, I cannot sleep ever. It's like it doesn't happen.
In Missouri, a single parent of 2, like Mary, is eligible for Medicaid, provided she doesn't earn a little over $300 a month. Mary's Medicaid money would go to Rediscover, but applicants like her face a delay of 3 to 6 months to get it.
And it would be $27.50 each time that you saw the doctor.
Rediscover wants to treat Mary right away, but while they wait for her Medicaid, it now has to ask her to contribute 50% of its costs. For her, it's unaffordable.
For sure, it means that my treatment will probably have to be postponed. It's a vicious cycle, really. When you don't have, the medical necessities that you need, how do you go find a new job?
It definitely does worry me. She's gonna struggle. She may be that individual that is gonna have to go to an emergency room to where she is going to be a chronic user of the more higher cost resources in the community.
Rediscover would only get Mary's Medicaid if she remains eligible for it and doesn't take a job that pays over $301 a month. Oddly, the way Medicaid works in Missouri, you could earn more and keep your Medicaid, provided your condition is more serious than Mary's. Meet Heather, a talented artist who's painted murals for children in hospitals.
I came to Kansas City basically to get my life on the right track and try to get better. Currently looking for a job, but I also need medication.
In Missouri, the general rule is that adults like Heather, who are under 65 with no dependent children, cannot claim Medicaid. But if she's pregnant or a condition is serious enough to classify her as disabled, she could qualify.
Just my name, right?
Rediscover helps her with the application, and it expects her bipolar disorder to mean she'll receive disabled Medicaid. If she gets it, Missouri says she can keep it and earn almost 10 times more than Mary, the mother of 2 we met earlier.
Minutes would be $27.50.
Although Rediscover put Heather immediately into an intensive outpatient program, she would have to help it cover the cost of her other treatment until a disabled Medicaid comes through. But again, there's often a delay, at least 90 days for disabled Medicaid, and this could mean she doesn't get the care she desperately needs.
I would have to pay $26 for an hour of therapy. It's just something I can't afford right now.
There are some clients that I feel are able to pay for it. If anything, it actually helps to motivate them to want to, get further in their treatment. But for those who really can't afford it, those are the ones that are going to fall through the cracks.
Rediscover supports Medicaid reform in Missouri, which would see coverage extended to around 300,000 people, nearly 50,000 of whom require behavioral health treatment at centres like Rediscover. They bring with them federal funding to cover the cost. It's money like this that could ease the strain on the other side of Rediscover's operation, is substance abuse treatment.
A lot of the women and men that are calling, they're homeless, they're injecting, heroin, meth. They're just really desperate for treatment.
Jamie is taking calls from people who want to end their addiction problems.
How much heroin are you using daily?
The volume of her calls rose by nearly 30% last year. She can offer immediate outpatient treatment, but if they need a bed and 24-hour care, there's a hitch.
Yeah, I don't like telling people that it could be up to 8 weeks or 12 weeks. The person I just spoke to shoots IV meth. And so when you tell somebody that's shooting IV meth every day that it could be 3 months, that could be the end of their life.
Last year, because of funding issues, Kansas City, Missouri lost nearly 30% of its substance abuse treatment beds.
He left a message saying that he heard there's a bed available and there is not a bed available.
Over the same period, waiting times for Rediscover's 24 beds have tripled.
I don't have a bed yet. I was calling to see how she's doing.
For women, it can now be up to 6 weeks, and for men, it could be 3 months.
The reality for the individuals that are placed on a waiting list is that they want to come in right now. They want to get treatment now. You know, sometimes they're homeless or at risk for being homeless or living in a drug house, so they can't participate in an outpatient program.
For Rediscover and the people it wants to serve, 2015 looks like it's going to be a difficult year.
Rediscover could generate more revenue by changing the focus of our mission. We could fairly easily go after people that have insurance. So that is an answer. That is not what the community needs. The community needs services for the very many uninsured people who call us every day wanting in.
Bye.
So let's begin with you, Representative Rick Bratton, on the Missouri side. Why are lawmakers in the state of Missouri so reluctant to say yes to Medicaid expansion?
Well, I think a lot of the reluctance of expanding is because it is an expansion of government that's got into the healthcare system. It seems to have an adverse effect of healthcare. We have doctors that are running from Medicaid. So if we expand it, then we're going to have our healthcare providers that are no longer taking it, and we'll have almost a healthcare desert. You know, we hear the funding that we're not participating, we're not taking the federal dollars. Well, Missouri already takes $1.25 of every dollar it sends to Washington. So to say that we're not getting money that we're paying in, we're getting more than we pay in. So to say that that's a false argument.
But we're hearing like $4 billion that you were losing in federal funding. Why would you want to leave that on the table?
Well, I think for the health of our citizens. I mean, if we're having a mass exodus of healthcare providers, stop receiving Medicaid. Well, why would we do that to our citizens to expand them onto Medicaid, and then they can't get the coverage or find anyone that takes the coverage?
Okay, this has been a big drumbeat. There are lots of rallies that occur. You've had pastors come from Kansas City lobbying the legislature. They've interrupted sessions of the legislature, Representative Ellington, but it hasn't had an effect.
It had a little effect because people were paying attention. Anytime you disrupt business as usual, you have legislators that actually start to pay attention. But I think the argument against Medicaid expansion is unrealistic. One, you hear that we're worried about the federal government maintaining the obligation. Well, we don't worry about the federal government maintaining the obligation when it comes to any other matching funds that we get from the federal government. That's not even a thought.
Like what? Like highways?
Transportation, or any dollars that we get from the federal government, we don't turn them down. To leave $4 billion on the table is, in my opinion, is not a smart thing to do when we have people here in the state of Missouri that we know don't have access to adequate health care. In some of the rural areas, I represent Kansas City, in some of the rural areas, we're seeing hospitals closing because we didn't do the expansion, nor did we do the health care exchange. So we lost money that could have benefited them. In rural areas, we're also seeing different chambers of commerce come out talking about, well, we need Medicaid expansion, but we're not having any action in the House, and I think it all boils down to politics, partisan politics, because we're talking about ACA or Obamacare as we often hear of it, but we're not talking about the benefits that the citizens of Missouri would automatically get, and we know they will automatically get these benefits.
When Representative Ellington says that the legislature isn't concerned about getting matching dollars from the federal government on other areas like in highways and transportation, why is that? What's different about that?
Well, we're $17 trillion in debt, and you know we don't know if we're ever going to get if we're always going to get that dollar. You know, and in regards to the roads, if we don't meet that match, we do lose those dollars. So what about here in the state of Missouri if something happens where we're not able to meet that match? Then we're out those dollars. And that's how it is with the roads, and we're at the critical mass with roads in that. So that's my concern. I mean, not only do they may not have the funds, but also we may not have the funds to match if that's the requirement.
Senator Melcher, in Kansas, there has also been no effort to make Medicaid expansion, to have any expansion of Medicaid, though the governor recently did say he would be supportive of signing a bill if there were to be one that comes towards him. Would you be willing to bring a bill towards the governor on Medicaid expansion?
Well, I don't think I would bring a bill, but you have to look at Medicaid expansion. First of all, we talk about these dollars that we're missing out on. Those dollars don't exist. Every one of those dollars is a borrowed dollar. So if everybody takes the stance that we're just going to pull as much money as we can from the federal government, it all comes out of our pockets anyway. So it's money that doesn't exist. Now, the thing that happens with this, you have to think back on who does Medicaid expansion really serve? It doesn't serve Kansas City very much. It serves the rural areas. And the rurals have been unwilling to pay taxes. If you look at the farmers only pay between $6 and $8 million in income tax of $2.5 billion. And that's all 49 million acres of farmland across the state. So they don't pay there. They're exempt from fuel tax. They're exempt from sales tax on machinery and equipment. And they get about a $700 million discount on property taxes. So until the rurals come to the table and say, we want to participate in the funding of government, we can't even think about doing something like this because it will be very expensive.
Now, when you proposed that, though, I did see some of the editorials in some of the Western Kansas newspapers. Oh, that senator from Johnson County, he's probably never spent one moment on a farm. He's never spent a moment on a tractor. He doesn't know the concerns of farmers.
Well, that may be so, but they haven't spent a moment in my shoes having to pay all the taxes that they're unwilling to pay. I mean, this is a lot of money, and the farmers have got to understand they've got to be part of fixing this problem. If they start to participate in funding of government with everybody else, it'll start to remove this divide between the cities and the rural areas.
Can there be any compromise on this, Kathy Wolfmore?
Well, I absolutely think we have to pass Medicaid expansion. It just makes sense. When you think about it, we've got the Affordable Care Act. However you feel about it, it is here. But when it passed, because states didn't have to expand Medicaid and they could choose, it left a huge gap. So you've got a big group of people that are too wealthy for Medicaid, but if you make $20,000 for a family of 4, you don't get the subsidies. So you're trapped in that gap in the middle and you get nothing. And it's just a better way to deliver health care. People will still get sick, but they show up at the emergency rooms. That's the most costly form of care there is. We want people to be matched with primary care doctors. We want them to get their blood pressure treated in the doctor's office and not end up in the ICU with a stroke. So it absolutely makes sense. As for the federal dollars, we've already missed out on $490 million in the state of Kansas and probably 4,000 jobs.
Senator Melcher.
Well, you got to remember how this whole thing came about. The hospitals made a deal with the federal government, and the deal went south. The part that the hospitals said they were going to give up stayed in place, but the federal government didn't deliver on the promise that they made. Now, that was obviously determined by the courts, but it's just an unsustainable system. We just can't provide this many services and this rich of a level of service to this many people without having a way to pay for it.
Kansas City area Republican Senator Ryan Silvey has proposed a compromise in the state of Missouri that will at least expand Medicaid just for veterans. And now you are a veteran yourself as a former Marine. Would you support that, to at least expand Medicaid for former veterans in the state of Missouri?
Well, I mean, we are able to obtain VA benefits. So I guess we have that to fall back on.
So you never saw that as a big win anyway?
No. I mean, we have that. We're able to obtain that.
In an attempt to close a $600 million budget deficit, Kansas Governor Sam Brownback has proposed big hikes on tobacco and alcohol taxes.
It's always the sin tax. The things that aren't good for you, but that's what they do.
At the start of this year's legislative session, Brownback proposed nearly tripling the tax on cigarettes to $2.29 a pack from 79 cents. He also proposed increasing taxes paid by consumers on beer, wine and liquor to 12% from 8%. Are we going to be paying more for a pack of cigarettes and a 6-pack of beer as a result of this legislative session in Kansas? Jeff Melcher?
I don't think so. Neither of these two taxes are getting much traction at all. And one of the things that we have to remember is on the border cities, they're just going to cross and go to Missouri and buy those things.
No, they won't, though, because Missouri is now going to raise their cigarette tax, the lowest in the nation currently. Isn't that right? I thought there was an effort to actually increase the cigarette tax in Missouri. They might even be on the ballot. Or is that going nowhere?
Well, it's proposed, but I don't see that happening.
You don't see that happening?
No, I don't.
Okay, but even though you need the money?
Well, that's the thing. Why are we going to pit one against the other on these types of taxes? What's next? Are we going to start taxing sugar? Are we going to start taxing coffee? Are we going to start taxing because we need these revenue sources?
Okay, well, how about another potential revenue source? The issue of marijuana keeps coming up in both states. Voters in Wichita went to the polls on Tuesday and approved easing penalties for possessing small amounts of marijuana. Backers say they wanted to send the legislature a message by passing this measure this week. What message did Wichita voters send Kansas lawmakers? Senator Melcher?
I don't think they really sent much of a message at all.
It's not going to encourage you to change any of the laws, joining other states that have legalized marijuana?
I don't think there's any desire in the Kansas legislature to make a change in that.
Senator, Representative Ellington, I've just elevated you to senator, but that's you like that, did you? But you actually have a bill in the Missouri legislature to tax and legalize, so it's actually a way of getting money for the legalization of marijuana. What is the status of that?
I'm going to have to do a couple things here real quick. The status of the bill that you're talking about is actually sitting. I filed it last year. I filed it again this year. We have a medical marijuana bill that's actually moving through the legislative process. But when we talk about borrowed money or taxpayer dollars, we need to figure out ways to use taxpayer dollars to improve services. So, and I just had to clear up a couple things. When we talked about the federal government and the roads, the federal government has never failed its obligation as the state of Missouri that's failed its obligation for the roads. With the legalization of marijuana, the taxes that we can use from there, we can actually improve healthcare, we can improve education. But it's about prioritizing. And when we talk about what we have to do, we have.
No, that's fine. Would you support that?
Mm-hmm. No, I do not support the legalization of marijuana, and I do not advocate.
Okay, I want to ask you finally, because the ride-hailing service Uber has been making headlines here in Kansas City as the city council pushes new regulations that the company says may force them to leave town. But Uber says they may be forced to pull out of Kansas altogether after Kansas lawmakers advance a bill requiring drivers for ride-sharing services to purchase commercial vehicle insurance. So many people called to complain in Kansas about the bill that the computer servers went down. What are you so worried about there in Kansas?
Well, we actually did get quite a few emails. I think in a 12-hour period, I got 1,200 emails. And so I think what the concern is that, from what I understand, if you're using your vehicle for a commercial purpose, your insurance wouldn't cover it. So if there's an accident and medical care was necessary, it wouldn't be covered. Also, we've heard different stories of people who called for Uber, they were picked up, and then their house was robbed. So I think there was just an attempt to rein it in a little bit and see if we needed to take a second look at it.
And that is our Week in Review Lawmaker edition. Our thanks to our Newsmaker guests. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.